Good morning, everyone.
Morning, Manprit.
Morning, Manprit.
Morning, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning. Okay, I think we have good number of people, so others can join as they, as they will come, they can join. So let's get started. So today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about something called as storytelling, and the relevance of storytelling in design. So I don't know how many are designers here, or how many are aspiring designers, but if you really want to be a good designer, if you really want to grow as a designer, then you should know the storytelling skills, or what makes a good storytelling, and how you can implement or use this storytelling, the art of storytelling, in your experience and design. Okay, so that is what I will be talking about, and I'll give you small walkthrough of how this what are the different components of stories, and also how can we, or what are the different artifacts we create in user experience, and how we can use these artifacts in the right way by telling the right story. Okay, so that is what I'll be going to start today, or explaining. So to the new people, this is me. My name is Manpreet, and I'm an experienced design consultant. I have more than 17, 18 years of experience in design. Some part, initially when I started as a graphic designer, went on to become art director, senior lead, UI designer, and then got into the UX. And currently I'm working as a manager, senior manager design. And when I was in India, I had a team of 25 people, big team, worked in both agile environment, lean environment, and worked with a lot of startups. Okay, so these are two places where you can contact me. This is my LinkedIn, that's my meetup group, and I try and conduct weekly events, so you can join and learn. And I try to cover or talk on different topics of design and about design. So yes, so in future, if you want to learn more and seek more knowledge, then yes, you should join that meetup group. Okay, so now let's get to the point. So what is storytelling? Understanding that is very important. Okay, so let's get started with the basic thing. Basic, when we say this sentence or this phrase, so whenever we uh, be it in school, be it be when with the parents, while in the night. So our parents, they used to tell us stories, right? So they used to start with something like, once upon a time there was a subject, here is the king. So basically, whenever we talk about something, what we do is we try to set the context. So whenever you also, whenever you're designing something, presenting something, talking about something, setting the context is very important. Explaining or introducing the subject, okay, giving the good introduction about the subject, the background story, and so on. So basically, you need to make it very interesting. Okay, setting the right context, introducing the right uh, players of the story, and so on. So this is the basic thing. Okay, so whenever you're starting anything, have or do your background work, understand what you're doing and why you're doing. Okay, so this is what it is. So basically, ever since our childhood, we have heard and read many stories, right? So every day, when meeting friends, we tell them stories. When in school or college, teacher tells a story. And in return, we also make stories and tell them. So whatever conversation, whatever talk we are doing, we do, it's basically a form of storytelling. Okay, so now how interesting you can make it, all depends upon your skills, and that's an art, and you should learn it, and you can refine it. It's easy, it's not that difficult. Okay, now stories and storytelling is in the heart of our DNA as a human being, correct? So basically, since the beginning of our civilization, we have been telling stories. In the initial phase where we were living in jungles and all, we used to draw using on the caves and all, right? So and then we became educated, we started storytelling in a different way, and so on. So basically, storytelling has been there and will stay. And how you can utilize that, it depends upon you. And I'll give you small context and also different elements and all, what you can use these elements nicely, and then set a right or create a right story. Now let me introduce a small event from my last month. Okay, so basically, last week what happened, I received a job offer from a company, and I was excited, right? So I was excited, so I prepared hard and appeared for the interview. And then when the offer was for the senior user experience designer, okay, and for that, since I worked hard, I did well, I cracked that interview. And I was, instead of just being offered the role of the senior user experience designer, I was offered the role of a lead user experience designer. Okay. And later that evening, what I did, I went out with my friends. I partied and and so on. And what is this? So this, what I told you, is a kind of a story. Okay. Now, how interesting you can make it, that depends upon you. So what I did, I just listed down the events that happened, and that became a story. Now you can add your personal touch. When the storyteller tells something, he basically doesn't just talks about the events that happened, but also introduces or adds his emotion, his thought, his intelligence, and so on. So as a storyteller, as a if working as a designer, we should always think about everything. Okay, not the user, just the user, not just the businessman, about technology, about the the background of the user, the culture, the demography, and so on. So a lot of different things we need to think about, take care of. Okay, so this is one simple story, and that is basically sequence of different events. This is one. So I attended a meeting where my boss asked me to create a product strategy, or that's UX strategy. I conducted workshop with different stakeholders and users in order to understand their needs. Right. So event after event. Now, after that, what I did, I crafted a product UX strategy and presented the same to my boss. Okay. So, and then what I got some feedback on few points, and then I went back and did some changes and then presented the strategy again. The strategy was approved and was aligned well with users and business goals. This is what? This is story two. Again, what I did nothing. I just listed down all the events, and that became my story. Okay. So similarly, storytelling is easy, and we'll learn how to learn that skill. So we all tell stories, and we do it every day. Every day. Like, we talk to people, and when we talk to people, we are in one way or the other telling stories. So we tell stories of love. Okay, we tell stories about success, excitement, achievement. So when we are very emotional, we tell the story in a different way. When we are stressed, our storytelling skills, or the our way of storytelling becomes totally different, right? So we need to understand that what affects the storytelling, and what is the relationship between story and the emotion and the storyteller. So we'll go through all those things. So stories are how we think, they are how we make meaning of life. Okay. Now, if the list of the events that I showed you, if I'll tell you to describe that, you will do that in your own way. Similarly, that's why it's said that yes, stories are how we think. You might think in a different way, I might think in a different way. So it depends upon person to person. That is the storyteller. Okay. And how we make meaning of life. So you might have a different perspective to the events, and I might have a different perspective because I have a different background. You have you bring a different background. So it all depends upon how the presenter or the storyteller thinks, and also what is his understanding of those events. Okay, so that is what it is, story. And most of our lives are spent telling stories. Storytelling is at the core of human experience, correct? So throughout our life, whenever you're talking, and not just talking, even emotionally with expressions, we are able to tell stories. So it's at the core of human experience. So every day, sometimes what happens, we really like talking to few people because they're very good storytellers, while others we don't, because they don't give that positive vibe, or they're not that perfect storyteller. So everything depends upon how you express and how you tell the story, or basically present the story. Now, storytelling is one of the most natural ways to share information, right? So whenever we are storytelling, what we're doing, we are in one way or the other, we try to convey or share some information, right? So it's basically we pass on the messages from self to the other people, and when doing that, we generally do the conversation, we generally tell, but that can be improved, that skill, and it could be in the form of story. So if you're trying to inform, that's one thing that we do every day. Persuade, other things, motivate, entertain, you need to incorporate stories. We tell the stories, but we don't do in the best way. So we should learn how to do that. That means every time we speak, we think about how to enhance a message with stories. Now I'm talking to you. I'm also trying to tell a story or create a story. Okay. And I'm trying to explain you in the form of a story. It all depends upon person to person and their approach. Okay. So why good stories are required? So good stories always captivate audience. It catches the attention of the user. Okay. Engages the user. So stories give us a sense of purpose, identity, and continuity between the past and the present. Right? So see any movie, they're also like what they do is they use the storytelling. So they start with something, some action events happens in the middle of this movie, and then at the end there's a climax, right? So there again is basically a relationship between the past and the present, and there are a lot of different events that happens. Okay. And for everything what they do, there is always some purpose, and there is continuity between the past and the present, and a lot of events happens, all are linked in some way or the other, and that is how they're able to captivate audience. So how can we learn from those storytelling, basically the movie making skills, and how the storytelling is used in movie making, even the advertisements, right? So we should be a good observer. We should observe like how they have done, what is the way they have crafted the story, and how they were able to like catch the attention. So we should learn from that and then start using that learning, those learnings in our daily life. Okay. Now let's understand what are stories. So stories are how we communicate, how we explain how things work. Easy, very easy. It's basically how we communicate. हम हम कैसे बात कर रहे हैं. So that is what it is, and how we explain how things happens, right? So if we have to explain something, we actually try and tell the story, explain. Similarly, how we make decisions, how we justify our decisions. Now, once your decision is made, if you have to like convince the other people, you try to explain. Okay, no, this is how this should be done, or that is how you try to give reasons, number of reasons, and that is basically you're trying to justify your decisions. So that again is a form of storytelling. Similarly, we use story to persuade others, right? If you have to persuade others, we again try to tell stories, we try to convince them, and so on. And this is also for understanding our place in the world. Okay, we try to understand, we try to see like where we are, who we are, and then we try to sell ourselves. If for example going out for the interview, we try to tell the other person, the interviewer, that yes, we are good in our skills, we know like how to work, and we have good experience, and so on. So again, it's all about understanding people, telling the events what happened in different way, communication happens, then persuasion, and so on. Okay. And similarly, how we create our identities, define and teach social values. Now the social values, like these are transferred from parents to these kids, kids to their kids, and so on. So this again happens in the form of story, because they try to tell story, good stories, bad stories, and they give you the values, transfer the values. Now why this story is so important? Because it also connects people and communities. So we are social being, right? So we need to live with the people, among the people, and so on. So story is something that connects these people, or the people with the communities and the other people of the community. So stories are really, really important. And so storytelling is used across a wide variety of programs, because storytelling directly taps into many different fields. So we'll see what are the different fields. Some of them I mentioned here. Socially, whenever we are there, like so in social environment, we use the storytelling. Okay. Similarly, in the education, whenever we are like there learning something new, be it in school, colleges, or like private coaching and all, we basically grasp the knowledge. Okay, we get the knowledge uh, by listening to the stories, and the teachers, they try to transfer the knowledge in the form of stories. Similarly, communication. Any industry related where the communication is used, they're also like telling the stories, like the movies, like the TV, even the newspaper, everywhere they're making use of stories. Theater, yes, they are using stories. Design, so we as a designer, we also use the storytelling or story in our designs, or like when explaining the story, or explaining the concept, the ideas and all. Okay. And by analyzing how storytelling works, how we use stories in everyday life, and why we tell stories, we can become better practitioner of storytelling as an art form, right? So just by analyzing, just by understanding what makes a good story, Yes, we'll have to do some homework. We'll have to learn like what makes a good story. We'll have to read about it, right? Or basically we have to explore. And by exploring, by reading, by understanding what makes something good and what makes a good story, we can really become a good practitioner of storytelling. And once we are a good storyteller, we can use that skill in our design life. Okay, and that can change. That will change your life. I can guarantee that. Okay, so learning that skill is very important. And also, since why do we use stories? Because these are easier to remember. Because if I'll just tell you something, like some list of some events and so on, you might not remember. But if I convert that in the form of some good story, add are my own emotions, and try to depict or explain in the form of visuals, or by adding like additional elements, you'll remember for life. So that's why the stories are easier to remember. So that's why we use the storytelling in our design. Whenever we are talking, explaining, we try to tell everything from the story, set the context, explain who the user would be, and a lot of other things. So stories, why it's easy to remember? Easier to remember because it has that emotional connect. When the storyteller adds his own emotion to the story, something powerful happens. There's a strong connection that happens that gets developed. So that's why this is very important. And if is sufficiently persuasive, brings about dramatic and profound changes in thinking. Correct? So it's all about the effect that you can bring with the right story. So let's understand story and storytelling. So we have heard a lot of stories since our like childhood, and also like when we were young, from parents, teachers, friends, neighbors, everybody. Now let's understand what is story and what is storytelling. And so storytelling is about delivering a fixed thing, or it isn't about delivering a fixed things. So whenever someone tells a story, they basically add their own emotions. Okay, so it's a dynamic process of you means who, the storyteller. So he basically shapes up the story with his audience, and it depends upon his experience, his understanding of the subject, and so on. So it's a different art. Okay, and one way of looking at the process of short story crafting and storytelling is through the storytelling triangle. Now we'll understand like what makes good story and what are the different components or the elements of story. So there's a concept called a storytelling triangle. So we'll understand that. So storytelling is a three-way relationship among one, the teller. Teller is who? The storyteller. And the second is basically the common subject. That's the story. And the third is basically who is listening to the story, and that is the audience. Okay. And also remember, with each element of the triangle connected. So you need all the three elements if you really want to bring the right impact. If one is missing, it won't work. So these are the three triangles. So let's see. So one is called as the storyteller, the second is the audience, and the third is the story. So these are the three important elements of story. So now what is story, or what is storyteller, and who are the audience? So we need to understand that. So here it's also important to remember that none of the points on the triangle is independent of the others. They are all connected, right? So all are connected. And storytellers, or basically the stories, are always mediated through a storyteller and exist in relation to an audience, right? There's a storyteller, there's a story, and then the audience. So when all the three are present, then you get the right story, or the story happens, or story is delivered. Okay, right one. So now let's understand this. So what is a story? So story is a narrative account of an event or a sequence of events. Stories are both containers and triggers. Fine. So this is the basic topic. This is the important topic that the storyteller talks about. And it is basically what? The narrative of the different events that happen, narration of the events. Okay, and a story adds emotion, characters, and sensory details to plain facts. So events could be like simple, but when the story is told, the storyteller adds his emotions and tries to develop the characters, okay, and add additional details so that the story becomes powerful. So that is the story. Who is the storyteller? Storyteller is one who interprets, shapes, and expresses the story. Right? So he is the one who is narrating the events. The storyteller's choice of words, tone, and body language makes that story uniquely theirs. Right? As I said, if the same story is given to like five people will approach it in a different way and present it in a different way. Okay, so that's why it is very personal. Storytelling is very personal. Okay, and then we have the last one is basically the audience. So audience takes in the story as told by the storyteller. So audience is there, they listen to what the storyteller is telling and then uses his words and performance cues to interpret the story. Now the thing is, imagine like there's a storyteller, he's telling or setting us kind of a context and then telling a story. The audience might take it in a different way if they have a different background story. So again, it depends upon like who the audience is, and if you have the understanding of the right audience, then you will be able to tell the right story and bring about the right impact. So they react to the whole story and its individual parts by applauding, laughing, crying, yawning, right? So this is the response that you get. And if people are not like enjoying, they will just yawn and move on. Okay, so we need to bring the right impact, and how to bring the right impact we'll see in design. So that was the core storytelling skills. Now what is the relationship of the storytelling triangle in design? So in design, this is how it looks. So basically the story is what? Story is your product, your solution, your different artifacts. Okay, so throughout the UX process, throughout the design process, what we do is like we create a lot of different artifacts and we present the artifacts, and like we try to tell a story or try to explain like what we learned and how we are going to use that learning in improving the product or creating the product. So that is the story. So basically your product is the story, your solution is the story, your artifacts are the stories. Similarly, who is the storyteller here? The designer, the UX designer, the one who's designing is the storyteller. And who is the audience? Audience is basically the end users, the people who will use the product. Okay, so they are the real audience. But apart from that, there are other people also who is involved in that. So these are basically the business people, then different stakeholders. Okay, and also the different teams like marketing team, development team, business, and then project management team, and so on. So everybody is audience because they are involved in this triangle. So user experience designer play the role of both storyteller and audience in UX process. We need to understand that, yes, we're not just the storyteller, but sometimes we also become the audience. So when we go out and when we are doing the research, so at that time when we're listening to the user, we are basically trying to understand their story, listen to their story or hear their story. And in that process, we become listener, we become the audience. Okay, so a good user experience designer is one who is a good storyteller, but also he should be like a good audience, or he is like a good audience, because once he has the patience, once he is there out in the market when doing the research, when he's having the patience, he's listening to the users' problems and their needs and so on. So then he becomes a good audience. Okay, so we need to understand that. So we also need to understand few other things. So and that is basically every story has different stages, right? So like every story they have like beginning, ending, and all those things. So you'll understand like what are those. So basically every story has an introduction, then in the middle or somewhere like you then see the problems, and after that there's some action happens, then there's a climax, and at the end there is a resolution. Okay, so this is basically the flow of the story, general flow. Okay, so you start with something called as introduction, you set the context, you tell who the characters are, you tell us, give an introduction of the story, and then after like a few minutes and so on, so there's always a problem. So problems arises, and then some action happens, the characters try to solve that problem, and at the end there is a resolution, and then there is some learning. So that is the story. Now how can we use this storytelling or this different stages or this flow of the story in our design, and how to make use of that? So we'll see. So this is what we do in the UX process. It's basically starts with understanding. So whenever we are given a challenge as a designer, we try to first understand what is the challenge, what is the problem, what is the user need or the business need. And once we have the basic understanding, we go out in the market, we start the research. We try to understand everything about the problem, everything about who the users are, how they use the product, where they use the product, how many hours do they use the product. Okay, and what is the objective or what is the actual need of the user, and if they're facing any problem, and if they're frustrated with some of the features or so on, what is the actual need, we try to understand during this research. Okay, once we have the understanding of the research, we come back. After the research, we come back and we do the ideation with our team. And that is basically the UX process that I'm talking about. We do the ideation, we present a lot of different ideas, and then we try to uh, select few ideas by the different ways. I'll talk about later, like when you'll be joining my workshop. So ideation happens, and once an idea is selected, the execution of the idea happens. They develop the prototype, and then after the testing and all, it's shipped, it's released in the market. Okay, so this is the process of UX, and we should, like, use storytelling in each of the stages. And once you start doing this, once you start using storytelling in when presenting your ideas, solutions, and so on, you will see a big difference in your life in this as a designer. We also need to understand, since we're talking about storytelling, so what are the different elements that makes good story? So Aristotle talked about like few of them. So I'll just present that. So one is the theme. The theme is basically the context. Okay, the theme of the story tells us the obstacle that needs to be crossed or the end goal of the project. What is the theme? What is the context? Why are we working on something? Or what is the objective? So we try to understand by when presenting this theme. And then we also try to understand the plot. So what are the users trying to achieve or overcome? What is the end goal? Similarly, we try to understand who are the characters of that story. Okay, that is basically, in our case, users. We'll understand that. And decor is basically the physical environment in which characters perform their acts. Okay, and then we have dialogue. So basically, the interaction between the people, what they're showing, what they're talking about, and so on. And then it's all about the melody, the all adding the emotions and so on. And last but not the least is basically the spectacle. So any plot twist in the stories that will make audience remember the story. So that is what the 7 elements of the good storytelling are, and we'll try to understand from the design point also. So when we talk about the design or try to establish the relationship of design with the story, so this is what we see. Okay, so let's start with the theme first. So theme is basically the overall problem statement or the product vision. Okay, whenever we're working on as a UX designer, when working on any product, we basically try to understand the challenge, the problem statement. So what are we trying to actually solve? So that is the core theme, central theme. Then there's a plot. Plot is basically overall objectives. So goals of the users, goals of the business. And then we also try to understand the different characters. So as I talked earlier, who are the users, who are the different stakeholders, who will be involved in the team as a part of the team. And similarly, other 4 things, that is basically the dialogue, that is the interaction, communication, meetings, interviews, and so on. And record is basically where the product will be used: at home, on the go, in the field, in the office. And melody is basically understanding the emotional highs and lows of the user. And spectacle is basically adding additional touch like gamification, okay, engagement, personalization to improve the overall experience. So remembering this, understanding this, and using this when designing the solution will help you like create the best product, engaging product. I hope you are getting this, like whatever I'm talking.
Yes, Manprit.
Yeah, great. So now let's understand good storytelling. What is it? And so good storytelling is interactive. It's not a one-way thing. So basically, whenever you're telling a story, the audience has to receive that well. Okay. So there's a storyteller, there's a story, and then the audience. And yes, it could be like one way or two way. It's okay. But here what happens is there is always a response. There should always be a response from the audience. Okay, though not in the form of words, but still in the form of emotions. The response, the good response, like clapping, shouting, or, like whatever. But there should be some response. If there is some response, then like then you can understand. Okay, analyze and see like, oh, okay, so people are liking it. That means you have told a good story. If not, then you need to like improve. And whenever we are creating a story, telling a story, we should always try to make use of 5 Ws and 1 H. That is basically who, when, where, what, why. And then 1 H is basically how. So ask yourself these questions like why, when, and all those things. And when you have the right answers, then use those answers in your story. Okay. So storytelling is interactive. Storytelling can be one to one or one to many. And